Welcome back. This week, we have a bit of a history lesson, but a history lesson I think that's certainly worth hearing as we're, in the midst of a resurgence. Usually when we talk about resurgence, we're talking about, we're hearing about Afghanistan or something like that. But no, we're talking about a resurgence of COVID. We just a few weeks ago, we thought that we could see the finish line. We
Right.
thought that we were almost there, and then along comes Delta variant,
Right.
and here we are, right in the thick of it again.
Starting to feel like 2020 again, right?
It is, and we're hearing so many things, and I know we have a lot of listeners and viewers on YouTube from all over the place. Not just in Florida, but it is fascinating to see how different states are handling the situation. And, it's really difficult to talk about it in some ways without getting into the political nature of it, because there is such a big difference between red states and blue states. We won't go in that direction, but my goodness, there is a difference.
Yeah, it was just a few weeks ago that we were thinking, okay, maybe we can start to get back to life as it was before the, and that the light at the end of the tunnel, looks like it might be an oncoming train after all. We were thinking that it wasn't, but maybe it is. And so here we go again, not only in our country, but in other countries around the world where the virus, as we said a year ago, has started to mutate, which is what viruses do. That's why we have a different strain of flu every winter, right, and why it's necessary to get a new flu shot each year, because viruses have this ability to change their shape just a little bit, right, and become something else. And I think we've mentioned on the program a couple of times that in the last pandemic of 1918-1919, it was the variant of what was then called the Spanish flu. It's nothing to do with anything. But the pandemic of 1918-1919, it was the variant that proved to be most lethal. Right. And we've always been afraid of that with this one. And that's why we are urged to get vaccinated, because vaccination is a way to slow down the spread of the disease so that it can't mutate. Right. I mean, that's the whole point, so that it doesn't mutate. Well, it's mutating. Right. And so this week's mutation is the Delta variant. We have no idea what it will do, what devastation it will wrought. We have no idea. It's unpredictable. Mm-hmm. But didn't you say there were 3 other variants coming along?
There are at least a few others. The main one that I've read a little bit about is called the Lambda variant, which sounds a little bit more intimidating even than the Delta, right? Because they're worried about it not even responding to or being managed by the vaccines,
by the current vaccines. And that's what's going to be the worst. That's the worst case scenario, right, is that one of the Delta variant, the vaccine seems to be effective in not protecting you from getting it, but you have a reduction of symptoms. Your right. symptoms aren't as severe.
Yeah, there's some protection, but not quite at the level of the original. But right. But yeah, it offers some protection and minimizes symptom presentation. Significantly decreases risk for death, of course, mm-hmm. which is great. That's what we want. The ultimate goal. But yeah, it's going to continue to evolve. It's going to continue to mutate, and that's what that is what living organisms do. And a virus is a living organism. Right. It infects and it mutates so that it survives. And And it's just sometimes there are viruses that evolve much more quickly than other viruses. So this is seems to be one of those cases.
Right, right. So what we want to do is end this as quickly as possible to prevent further mutations,
Right.
because we don't want to get a mutated form of this disease for which we have no cure,
Right.
for which we have no protection.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a dangerous game. And we have to just leave it up to the experts to get it right, to keep us at least, if not ahead of this virus, at least not to get too far behind, so that it really does become destructive.
Right.
And in that vein, we have a little pop quiz this morning, because we thought, well, let's take a look at this. My curiosity really just got the best of me, so I apologize, because I kind of sprung this on you. I sprung this on you yesterday.
Yes.
When I sent this to you, and I knew how you would react, because you hated history when you were in school, and you continued to hate history. No, I knew how you would feel about this, so I do apologize. But I wanted to ask you if you know who Maurice Hillman is. Maurice Hillman was born in 1919, died in 2005. He was born in the plains of Montana, a little city, grew up on a farm in Miles City, Montana. And he was the last of 8 children. His twin sister died in childbirth, and his mother died 2 days later. And he was raised on his uncle's farm.
Yeah.
And his task was to take care of the chickens. That was one of his jobs. Little boy grew up on a farm. His job was to take care of the chickens. And well, we'll get to that later. He was a smart kid, smart guy, got a scholarship to Montana State University, and completed a bachelor's degree in microbiology and chemistry. And in 1944, he went from Montana State, went and got his PhD in microbiology and chemistry from the University of Chicago. And if you read about him, these were the days when getting a PhD was a rigorous, it was a sink or swim mentality. Today's doctoral students, it's a rigorous training program, but you're coached and mentored along the way to become as good as you can be. In those days, if you got a PhD, you were kind of on your own, and you were just slogging it out, and the goal was to get rid of you and make it as difficult as possible. And in those days, if you had a defense of your dissertation, anybody could come to it.
Right.
So you could be doing a topic on Mars, and you could get somebody from NASA to come into your dissertation and ask you questions that you couldn't answer, and you would fail your program. So these were tough times. If you talk to people who were educated in those years, they kind of laugh at how we do it today, because we made it so easy, or they say it's easy. So because he was such a good student, his professors assumed and encouraged him to go into academics. So they thought, this is a perfect fit for an academician. This guy's smart, he's going to do research, he'll be a great addition to a faculty, he really should go into academia. Instead, he chose to go into industry. And the reason he did was because in those years, in the 30s and 40s, we didn't have the kind of funding for education and grants that we have today. And he said, no, universities just don't have the resources. Those resources really started to become available in the 60s and 70s. But when he was educated, there wasn't the kind of government funding that there is today. And in fact, most of that came out of the Cold War. We had to beat Russia, so we had to fund science. And so he decided to go into industry. And part of that was a moral decision, because he said, whatever work I do, I want it to be practical, and I want it to get to market. I want it to benefit people. I don't want to just work in the lab and do things that nobody knows about. And his first contribution was in 1944, the year that he graduated and finished his PhD. He developed a vaccine, and you can see where this is going now.
Right.
He developed a vaccine to immunize that immunized United States soldiers fighting in the Pacific Theater, that protected them against the Japanese B encephalitis, a brain virus. And he developed a vaccine to protect American troops.
Right.
Now, you've heard of the Asian flu.
Right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
In 1957, so after the war, he goes back and starts working for a company. And he was the person who discovered that the Asian flu, sometimes called the Hong Kong flu, but the Asian flu was a different strain of flu. And he developed a vaccine to battle this new strain of flu. And because he was in business, he was able to produce 40 million doses. And those doses got to people, and the Asian flu was stopped.
Right. Yeah.
Sound familiar?
I think that the big take-home message right here so far is the idea that you know, back in the 40s and 50s, this guy understood that a virus can have different strains, and that those different strains are going to respond differently to various vaccines and our you know, innate development of antibodies and everything. And so that because that virus can mutate, there's these changes that happen, and then we have to respond to it differently.
Right.
And again, like you said, you know, does it sound familiar? This is exactly what we're going through right now.
Right.
That we have this virus that continues to mutate, it continues to change. And so when it does, we have to shift and adjust as well.
Right, right. And the whole idea, we're talking about his work in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So this is quite almost a century, 70 years ago. But he was using a technology that even then was hundreds of years old.
Right.
You all recognize the name Edward Jenner, who developed the vaccine for smallpox. Mm-hmm. And this was a discovery that this was in the 1700s, that people realized that if you took a small amount of the virus and you put it into people, healthy individuals, that it would spark their immune system and they would develop antibodies to fight the disease. When the Europeans, conquerors, came to the Americas in the 14 and 1500s, there was only a handful of conquistadors.
Right. And
everybody wondered, how could they defeat thousands of Aztecs and Incas with these great civilizations? Well, it was smallpox that killed them, not the soldiers. Okay, right. Because the Native Americans, the indigenous populations, had no immunities to smallpox. Europeans had developed some, but the Americans didn't have any, or the indigenous peoples didn't have any. And so smallpox just was rampant through the population, and it destroyed those large advanced civilizations in Middle Americas.
Right. So
we've known for hundreds of years, we've probably known for more than that, because smallpox was around in ancient Egypt. Right. It's been around forever. And they've known for a long time that by exposing people to the virus, right, that you develop immunities to it.
Yeah, but Heilman, when he was looking at this and he realized that we have these, we develop these antibodies, and using it to develop immunizations and vaccines and things. And then the acknowledgement and understanding that it took to look at the mutations and how that changed. He talked about these mutations as something called antigenic shift.
That's right.
Or antigenic drift, and he said that because of this, we're probably going to need influenza, flu vaccines every year, because it's going to continue. It's going to slightly change, sometimes significantly change. on a periodic basis to where we're going to need a different vaccination every year.
Right. We're talking about the variants, this Delta variant. Well, he's the person who discovered the genetic changes that occur in these viruses.
Right.
He was the one. He was the one who first, what you called antigenic drift, okay, or shift, that viruses will mutate. He was the one who discovered that. So all the stuff that we're talking about today came from his laboratories, came from his work. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in 1957, he goes to work for Merck, a company that's still around today. And it was while he was working at Merck that he developed 40 vaccines. The vaccines that we used to take, he developed 40 of them, the 40 that we know about. It was in his laboratory. And he developed, we have 14 vaccines,
right?
Sort of the American vaccine schedule,
right?
Of chicken pox and measles and mumps and rubella. He developed 8 of those.
Right.
And so this is the guy who developed the vaccine for measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, meningitis, chicken pox, pneumonia, HIV, and rubella. Mm-hmm. This is the guy.
Right.
You ever heard? I never heard of Maurice Hill. Okay. His vaccines, it was a funny article. Well, it wasn't a funny article. One of the articles was about him, was written in the 80s. And it said, his vaccines save over 8 million lives a year. Yeah. It's credited with wiping out. We no longer have smallpox. Okay. It's smallpox. Well, I'll get to that later, but his vaccines are credited with saving over 8 million lives a year. And yet nobody has heard of him. And they mention in the article, they mentioned Madonna and Jose Canseco. People probably don't even know who Jose Canseco is. He was a famous baseball player back in the 80s, a home run hitter. And he said, everybody knows who these people are, but here's a guy whose work has saves 8 million lives a year. Nobody knows him.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. And he's been, his work has been profound for decades. I mean, in the 1950s, there was a big influenza outbreak in Hong Kong. And it could have been, another pandemic. It could have been another massive outbreak. And so he saw some warning signs related to that. And pretty quickly, again, very similar to what we have with our current situation, pretty quickly over the course of a couple of weeks, he and some of the people that he was working with found a way to create a vaccine, right, that they're estimating saved thousands of people's lives. So even though that particular flu variant ended up killing about 69,000 people here in America, they're saying that without his vaccines, without his work, could have killed many, many, many more.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. So he ended up getting awards and medals and things for that. But again, we've never heard of him.
Now, Berney, do you have a vaccination scar on either of your shoulders? I do.
Yeah.
Everybody from my generation, if you look at one of their shoulders, they have this little
round.
I don't know. Would your mother have one?
She does, yeah.
Yeah. Because when we were inoculated against chickenpox, I barely remember it, but it was like about the size of a dime or a nickel. And there seemed to be multiple needles in it, and it would be jabbed into your arm. Well, you were being infected with the chickenpox virus. And there would be a pussy little sore on your shoulder that you weren't allowed to touch.
Right.
You had to leave it alone. And that was the live virus being injected into your body to protect you. Those of us who had that, we need to get revaccinated now because it doesn't last forever.
Right.
And so if you're traveling to countries where chickenpox is still around, that zoster virus is still around, you have to get revaccinated
Mm-hmm.
to give you enough protection.
Right.
And so there's nothing new, but now you took probably a little sugar pill, a little sugar cube.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, because what they did is they had an oral
Mm-hmm.
form that they could put they could put it into it. I think it was a sugar cube or something, and you could it would dissolve and you would get the virus. So your generation, like none of my kids have
Right.
vaccine scars. So, but this is the guy who really brought all this. And again, he didn't invent the technology. The
Right.
technology had been around for several hundred years. So there's nothing new about what he did. Now, our second person is a woman by the name of
Catalin Carrico.
Katalin Kariko. She was born in Hungary. She was a Hungarian physician, born in Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
And she ran out of funding. This is the person who's credited with developing the messenger RNA vaccine that we use in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines.
Right.
That's the technology. And she's credited with that. And there was an article written by a husband and wife physicians that this was 40 years ago, okay? So she was working in the 80s and in Hungary, and she ran out of funding. And this was during the Cold War. And she ran out of funding, so she came to the United States, was hired, joined the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. And she was working on this mRNA technology. And there were 7 grants that year. 6 of them were funded by the government, because this is in the 80s now, the government was funding this research. And hers was not funded because it was considered to be too controversial, all right? But there were 2 chance meetings that she had. One was with a guy by the name of Drew Weissman, and he was an immunologist he had been at the National Institutes of Health and had worked with Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah.
His names now are familiar. And Weissman was working on a vaccine for HIV, right? Because this was the AIDS epidemic had just kicked in. And so they met, I think at a conference or something, and decided to start collaborating because Weissman was interested in her work for the treatment of HIV, which was another one of those viruses. We didn't have any protection for it. And there was this scramble to say, what can we do about this virus? Okay. The second chance encounter was with a researcher from BioNTech, and we've heard of BioNTech, and that's a company that we've all heard of because of the coronavirus, okay? And he was very impressed with the technology that she used in the mRNA technology. So the article that is written, or the book that's written, talks about how these discoveries, these innovations, sometimes happen almost by accident. Because had she not accidentally bumped into these 2 other researchers, this technology that she developed in the 80s would be in the valley of death. They call it the valley of death. It's created, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Right, because we both worked in academia, and it is what this story reminded me of is just how many ingenious ideas and possibilities and innovations probably died on on somebody's desk because they didn't get funding.
Right.
When you think about the way that academia works is without funding, things don't happen.
Right.
You don't just work. I think it's a bit of a misconception that a lot of people have is that, when you're at a university, you're just doing research all the time. Well, you do, but you can only do the research that gets funded. You have to pay for your time. And universities are pretty, especially nowadays, they're very strict about how much money you're bringing in and to account for your time and your work. So yeah, without these 2 happenstances, who knows where things would be right now.
Right, right. And our purpose in talking about Hillman and Carrico is a little less lofty than you know, innovation and how innovation gets to market. Ours is that this technology, because this technology has been around for more than 40 years. This what you read as mRNA technology has been around. It's been tested. It's been used safely and successfully against any number of viruses. There's nothing new about this. It didn't come out of a laboratory last year.
Right.
This was back in the 80s. This stuff was being researched, and it continues to be researched. In 2018, in fact, we posted this. If you want to read about this, there was an article published in Nature magazine, and it was a review article. And in fact, one of the articles on it is Drew Wiseman, the same guy that she collaborated with, that gives the story behind this virus, or behind this vaccine. And this review article, now a review article is written way after something has been tested, and there are a number of articles about it. Right. So you go back and you look at the literature and do a whole review. It was written in 2018, before the pandemic ever hit. So right. The technology that's being used in the vaccine was developed long before 2018.
Right. Which you know, is just to put the line underneath it of what you're saying is that a lot of people resist the idea of getting vaccinated for COVID-19, right, because they are saying, well, this is brand new stuff and we don't know what it's going to do. We don't know what it does.
Right.
It just came around last year in response to this. No, this is technology, you know, whether it was Hillman, who's been doing this for, you know, 60, 70 years, right, or it's Carrico, who's been working with messenger RNA based you know, vaccines and work for, you know, 20 years, 30 years. It's been around a long time. And, you know, with new technology, we can get through the process of developing some of these things much, much faster. Again, remember what we said about Hillman, who, you know, in 1957, with right, the Hong Kong influenza, you know, it was just a couple of weeks that they worked to develop a vaccine that helped save the lives of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
It's not brand new.
No. And bringing these things to market very quickly. And this is work that's we know this technology. We know how this stuff works, whether it's a live virus or it's an RNA messenger system. We know this technology. It's not new stuff. Okay?
Right.
So when people make the argument, well, I'm not putting that in my body, I don't know what that will do. We do know what it does. We've known for 40 years what it does.
Okay? Right. And it's much more sophisticated now. You know, I think that the other thing that people struggle with is that, you know, they say, yeah, you're putting a live, you know, the virus, you know, infecting us with the virus, and we don't know what it's going to do. Well, but the technology now is far superior to, you know, what they used to do with smallpox, where they, you know, would take actually some of the discharge from the, you know, from the active virus and or blood from an infected person and inject another, you know, a healthy person with it. This is far beyond that. You know,
when Jenner did his work in the 1700s, he would actually take discharge from a sore,
right, and
scratch it into the skin, and he did that on his own children.
Yeah,
that's how sure he was that he did it. That's what led to the breakthrough, is that he did this on his own kids and showed the world that this is safe. It's an effective way to protect your children against this horrible smallpox. Is a wretched disease.
Yeah,
and so, but that's a live virus. Messenger RNA is not a live virus. You're not injecting a live. You're changing something about the cells, but you're not injecting somebody with a live virus. Okay, right. But it's not a new technology. So what's the take-home message here? So what about vaccines and the coronavirus? Well, we don't. Dr. Berney and I are not here this morning to try to change anybody's mind about their vaccine decision. That's not what this is about. But at the same time, I think we would be remiss if we didn't, if we remained silent, if we didn't discuss these things. It's helpful to know this stuff as you make, because people say, well, I think I ought to be able to make my own decision. And I say, absolutely, but make your decision based on reliable information.
Right.
And one of the things you need to know is that this is not new technology. This wasn't invented in 2020 or 2021, okay? And then other people say, well, I could still get the virus. Even if I get the vaccine, I can still get the virus. It's possible, but again, that's not new.
Right.
In 1978, the World Health Organization, assumed that smallpox had been completely eradicated. In fact, it has been. But in 1978, a woman in England by the name of Janet Parker contracted smallpox. Now, she worked in the anatomy department of the Birmingham Medical School. And as it turns out, there was a laboratory in the medical school that it was one of a handful of laboratories in the world that was allowed to work on the smallpox virus. And so this is a controlled, sterile environment. But he had, the head of that laboratory had the technology, and he was given permission to work on the smallpox virus. Nobody knows how Janet Parker contracted smallpox. But she eventually died. At first, it was diagnosed as chickenpox when she got, because they said, well, it has to be chickenpox. But her mother came in and said, no, my daughter had chickenpox as a child, and this is not what it looked like, okay? And she described the chickenpox and said, this is something different. Turned out she had smallpox. She was sent to a isolation hospital in England and died a few days later. Her family, who had all been exposed, were all given the virus. They were all inoculated against smallpox, and they survived. Her father died of a heart attack during this whole process because he was worried about her. And the guy who ran the laboratory committed suicide. And it's a tragic story. She is the last recorded death from smallpox on the planet. Okay, that was in 1978. There was one other person in 1977 in Africa, and then she died in 1978. This is the last death. So why did she get it? With all these people in this building, why did only Janet Parker get it? The reason I mention this is because we don't know. I mean, there are questions. Right. Now, here's a disease we thought had been completely eradicated. They thought, how could anybody have smallpox? And so, yeah, there are questions that we don't have answers to, just like this one. We don't have answers to it.
Right.
Because we stopped that we stopped that spread, because what people were afraid of is that smallpox is back and it's going to go through the country. No, they vaccinated people and it ended.
Right. And I think that, you know, we don't know, and because we all have, all of our biology is slightly different, you know, and so it's remarkable even that even though there are some breakthrough cases, that the breakthrough cases are as relatively rare as they are.
That's right.
With the massive amount of variability between each of us, you know, whether it's our immune systems or our, you know, just some of our genetics that make us, you know, different, it is remarkable to think that despite those differences, it works for the vast majority of us.
Right. For hundreds of millions of people.
Right.
Okay.
So yes, there are some breakthroughs, but when you think about the number of breakthroughs versus the number of non-breakthroughs, it's pretty remarkable.
Right. Yeah. And it's pretty safe.
Right.
When you think of the millions and millions of cases of doses, and you think of the handfuls of side effects that people have had, well, that's going to happen. I mean, that's just the nature of biology, is that you're going to have anomalies that occur. Why did Janet Parker get smallpox? Nobody knows. By the way, they couldn't do an autopsy. They were afraid to do an autopsy because they were afraid of spreading the disease.
Sure.
So
sure.
they weren't able to to ever determine why she got it and nobody else in the building got it. Why her? Okay, because there's something unique about her biology. We don't know what it is. Okay, presumably she had chicken pox, but I don't know whether she was vaccinated or not. So
right, we
she may
assume
not
she got. We assume that she had the smallpox vaccine. We don't know for certain. So
right. So that's point number one. Point number two is, and the science that produced messenger RNA is the same science that overworked, beleaguered healthcare workers are going to use to try to save your life if you contract this virus.
right.
It's all the same science.
Right.
You want to go to an emergency room, all of the decisions that are made in that emergency department
right.
are based on the science that produced mRNA.
Right. Yeah, it's yeah, the science that people question that produced the vaccines is the same science that they're going to rely on for treatment if they get the virus anyways.
That's what science is. Science. This is how we do science.
Right.
Okay. And so you say, well, I want this science, but I don't want this science.
Yeah. I don't want the science to prevent it, but I certainly want the science to treat it. And that is such a unique way of thinking.
Right.
But it's very consistent with lots of other things, that we're much more reactive than we are proactive.
Right. Right. Yeah. This is a way. Here's some science that you can use to prevent this disease from spreading. It'll prevent you from getting it. It'll prevent you from dying, and it'll prevent the virus from spreading and mutating and developing something that we cannot have a treatment for. And then 100 million people will die. Okay. So you can't pick and choose. Well, you can, of course.
Shouldn't.
But think about that decision. The science in the ER is the same science that produced the virus. Okay. The final point, and I don't mean this politically, but I really do think that politicians have squeezed about as much out of this controversy as they can. I mean, we all now know that the whole pandemic has been politicized. We know that, everybody knows it. And politicians are using this for political gain. And they're making decisions based not on science. They're gambling that decisions that they make will work out for them, will get them political points. But I think as you look at the different states and you see people using the virus to gain political advantage, I think that they've squeezed about as much as they can. And I think if we're going to get this thing under control, we have to start relying on the experts, on the scientists who have known for hundreds of years how to do this. There's nothing new about the coronavirus. It's a new virus, but there's nothing new about the technology or the treatment for this disease. And it's time we say to the experts, you know how to get us out of this, lead us out of this, because the politicians are not going to do that. And I think that they need to stop pretending that they know something that the scientists don't know.
Right. Yeah. And there's a whole lot more that could be said about, nobody is trying to infringe on anyone else's rights or their freedom of decisions, to make decisions or choices or anything like that they feel is right for themselves and for others. But don't do that based upon unfounded conspiracies, unfounded claims of these covert ideas or missions or plans or anything like that. It's be informed, make a decision, make your free will decision to do what you want to do, but do it informed. That's the key word, is you have to be informed. You need to know what it is that you're deciding. Not because somebody told you that, but because you understand that, because you've learned about it, you've read about it, you understand what's going on.
Yeah, we know. I mean, I think the biggest difference with this pandemic is the internet. We now have the ability to disseminate information very quickly to very large numbers. I mean, we've seen that. We saw that in the spring. What was that? In Tunisia, when the revolutions just started. I forget what it's called, the something spring. And you can use the internet to get information broadcast to large numbers of people.
Right.
And that's what happened with this pandemic, is that false information,
Right.
information can be true or false. False information is able to be broadcast to millions of people with the push of a button. We all know that. And that's what's happened here, is that misinformation got mixed in with the science, and it has created this environment of hostility against the scientists. I mean, look at all the threats and the criticism that Anthony Fauci, I mean, he's devoted his life to this stuff. He knows as much about this as anybody in the world. And the abuse that this man has had to put up with, because he's trying to save people's lives, you know, it's baffling to me. So
absolutely. And when you read about things, you know, read from different sources, you know, and read thoroughly, read all of the information, you know. My goodness, there are books out there that tell you that it's dangerous to eat vegetables. We know that it's not dangerous to eat vegetables, but there are books out there that say that it's dangerous to eat vegetables. So you know,
and one more, don't use horse paste. And you're going to say, horse paste? What is horse paste? Well, somebody read the ingredients in the mRNA vaccine and said, oh, this is the same stuff that's in this medication that we give to our horses. It was a single ingredient. I forget the name. I forget what the ingredient was. So this guy started taking the medication that they give to horses, and that was going to be the way he was going to protect himself against the coronavirus. Well, now a horse, how much does a horse weigh, Bernie? Like 1,500 pounds?
What?
Okay, so they're taking, and I don't mean to laugh, but they're using horse paste, this medication, and they're taking it, and they're getting sick because the dose is way too high, because it's meant for a large farm animal, not for humans.
And I had not read that about that, but it's people, you know, it's just so difficult to, because what they're saying is I would rather do this unfounded, never been tested, never been explored before treatment plan than this other one that, yes, is new, but has been used and looked at by, you know, by now, you know, millions of people. But I'm going to do this other one, you know, because I've got this horse.
And also, here's this thing that we've tested for 40 years. Has the horse paste been tested for 40 years? Has it? I mean, it's your choice, of course. You know, we
Sure.
give you your choice, but here's your choice. You can take this horse paste, or you can take this.
Right.
Which one do you want to use?
Yeah. All right.
So yes, I think we have a citation for the nature. If you're going to read stuff, read the stuff that comes from people who have devoted their lives to studying it, not to somebody who read about horse paste, horse medication. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Be careful. Be you know.
Be wise consumers of information.
Right.
All right.
And we hope this helps. This sort of background to vaccinations and the new technology, this wonderful new technology that we have. So there's a story here, and we hope that this helps you make your decisions.
So, all right. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.